Could the profit and sustainability rules be about to change in the Premier League? Now, I did a little video yesterday about West Ham's potential windfall come the summer window. No matter what manager will be in charge of West Ham could find themselves with a little bit of a summer kitty, a windfall of money. And that's because the Premier League clubs are meeting later this week to discuss replacing the current profit and sustainability rules with the new financial play regulations. Under proposals being discussed by the Premier League, that the rules would potentially align with UEFA's squad cost ratio system. Now, you can't help but think that the Premier League are just playing silly buggers here and really just want to generate so much interest around the Premier League. Now, it is a business. We all know that, but it is becoming so corporate. It's becoming so, you can't help but think, a bit corrupt. It's a big accusation, but you can't help but feel that way sometimes because one moment there's one rule that affects another. And this January, we saw the most least spending from the Premier League clubs because the profit and sustainability rules came into play. Now, the Premier League clubs are meeting this week to discuss replacing those current rules with new financial fair play regulations. The current Premier League rules, profit and sustainability rules, limit clubs to losses of £105 million over a 3-year period. Now, let's get you a little bit of an explainer here. Under the new potential proposals that are being discussed by the Premier League, it would have new rules which would instead align with UEFA's squad cost ratio system. In that system, UEFA limits clubs to spending 70% of their revenue on squad costs, transfers, wages, and agents' fees. So their total turnover. Premier League clubs could adopt a similar approach, which would see clubs limit to spending 85% of turnover on squad costs. Now, under UEFA's rules, for example, let's use this as an example. And it's a good example, and it's just easier numbers. If your turnover is £500 million per year, turnover is all your expenses on the table, you would be allowed to spend 70% of that on player costs. That equates to around about £350 million. Now, not every single Premier League club in one window, for example, in 1 year, would be able to spend or have a turnover of £500 million. And it's interesting because if you're one of the bigger clubs with a big turnover, you'll be able to spend a lot more money on players and transfers than some of the smaller clubs. So right now, you've got clubs like Manchester City, who would play, say, the likes of Luton Town, and you would have the differentiation of £500 million, say, against a club that could potentially only spend, say, £100 million, for example. Now, listen, that situation is here already. We have clubs that do spend more money in players and wages than the so-called smaller clubs. That's there with an abundance. And Sky themselves use an example of what it's trying to potentially do. So the critics, they've said, is saying that it's trying to stop someone who's got all the money, like Roman Abramovich, coming into Luton and saying, I'm going to turbocharge Luton and turn them into the Man City or Chelsea by spending lots of money in players and wages. That simply won't be allowed because if you're new, the owner of Luton, you'll have to stick to this new limit. And it's going to be controversial, but it's definitely not going to be decided this week. It's going to be discussed at the meeting. There's definitely not going to be a vote at this meeting during the 2-day one, which starts on Thursday, but it's definitely something that the direction that the Premier League are looking to do. Now, clubs already who play in Europe abide by these rules anyway because they're UEFA rules, so it makes sense for the Premier League to mirror that. All Premier League clubs have a say, and they will be a range of different views. And remember, the rules are that 14 Premier League clubs will have to vote for it to be carried anywhere else. Now, the profit and sustainability rules What limits the clubs from spending more? In the simplest of terms, the Premier League team tots up their annual accounts. They can make a loss no greater than 105 million across the previous 3 seasons. Clubs can only lose 15 million pounds of their own money across those 3 years. So that's no more than 15 million pounds extra on outgoings like transfer fees, player wages, and paying off maybe managers or players compared to their income, say, of the TV money that does come into clubs, season tickets, selling players on, making fees here, there, and everywhere, club merchandise, you name it. And the other 90 million of any other 105 million must be guaranteed by the owners buying up shares, known as the secure funding package. And it means that basically they're there to bankroll the club. To be honest with you, it's a way of just moving the markers, in my genuine, honest opinion. Because if they're going to try and replace them, whose hands does it fall into? Who does it play into? And for me, it plays into the top teams, the teams that have the money to invest in that summer, in that window, in that whole year around. Can that benefit West Ham? Yeah, possibly it can benefit West Ham, because if you take into consideration our full turnover, then we'll be able to spend more money based upon our turnover than what we have to do to stay within the losses the club makes. So that can, in theory, become a cash injection for the summer. The issue you have is if we do inject that money, the clubs that spend and have a higher turnover than us, it will just be moving up like this. And it doesn't really benefit anyone as such. It just allows for clubs to spend more money and more money to be put into the game. And I don't know at what point this changes. I don't know at what point that we have to limit the clubs. We put a spending cap. Has it gone too far? I think it has. How do you bring it back? And I don't know if you can. And what once was football that we loved, that had this whole vibrant meaning behind it, the family feeling, the local community, the allowing the fans to come over and feel at home if you were traveling from abroad, has become so corporate that it does take over. And you see that not just from behind the scenes, but in front of it on the pitch itself. The decision makings that are taking place on the pitch have become so tied up by rules that in actual fact they're defeating the purpose of the reason why they were brought in. People are scared to make decisions on the pitch because if you make the wrong decision and it goes to the cameras and they make the wrong decision in a quick time, it costs clubs points. Points cost them a position in the league. A position in the league down the way costs them millions of pounds. And if that also leads to relegation, that could be catastrophic for some clubs. So I don't know how you resolve it. Is this an answer? Who knows? This is the potential of what is coming in. The Premier League clubs will be discussing it this week. This was just a little explainer video. The profit and sustainability rules supposedly to change. Is football dead? Or is it? Hope you've enjoyed that. Take it easy. Come on, you irons.